When I built my gravel bike from a converted hybrid last year, I thought it would last me a while, especially as it's made from aluminium. However, if you've watched me taking on the North London dirt ride earlier this year, you'll know that that ride pretty much killed the bike. Now, I could have done a little bit of work on it to get it fixed back up and working again, but if you've watched any of my videos riding that gravel bike, you'll know that I complain about the weight of it pretty much constantly. So that's why I decided it's time for something a little more lightweight. And that is why I am back in the garage this week for another cheap carbon fibre bike build, gravel edition. So I'm heading down to the south coast in a week or so's time to take part in the Garmin Ride Out event. And although it's not strictly a gravel event, it does wind its way through the beautiful roads of the New Forest. So I felt like it would be a perfect opportunity to build up a new gravel bike for the occasion. Now, I bought this frame from a company called Seraph, who make a whole host of road, gravel, mountain and TT bikes. And I first heard about them from a couple of friends who had previously bought road bike frames from them, carbon fibre road bike frames, and they were pretty pleased with them. So I did a bit more digging, did a bit more online research, and I discovered there were some pretty favourable reviews online too, so I thought I would take a punt. Now, they are obviously a Chinese manufacturer, but as I've mentioned before, pretty much all of the big name brands have their carbon frames, or at least one line of their carbon frames made in China. I bought this one direct from their website. Now, they do also sell on AliExpress, but after having a few emails back and forth with them, asking various questions about the frame and different setups and such like, I decided to just order direct from them. So this is the GR047 frame made from T1000 carbon fibre, which in layman's terms just means that it's a very strong carbon layup. And it's pretty standard in terms of bike frames these days, just the same as 6061 aluminium has become the standard for alloy bikes. Now, the frame has an internally routed cable setup, but to run the cables fully inside the frame, you will need to buy the handlebar from Seraph, which then comes with the specific steerer tube spacers with the holes in them to fit the tubes and the hoses and the cable housings. More on those later though. Talking of buying though, I just want to point out that I have purchased this entirely myself using my own money. And although Seraph have given me a discount code, which I will link down below if you guys want to use to buy your own frame like this or any of their frames, this video is not sponsored in any way. With that in mind, please consider liking and commenting on this video and subscribing if you haven't already. That's just a way of helping to push this video out a little further and helps me to earn just a little bit of money to try and recoup the costs I have spent out buying this frame, which then helps me bring you more bike builds. But I digress. Now, you can get the handlebar in a number of different widths and stem lengths to suit, so you just have to let Seraph know which one you want when you buy the bike. Now, you can of course buy your own handlebar with the spacers to suit yourself, but I just wanted to make sure that every part of this build was going to go to plan, so I didn't want to chance it by buying a handlebar and spacers that didn't quite fit this bike and didn't quite work out, so I was more than happy to buy them all from Seraph themselves. And I must say, I do really like the clean look of the full internal routing, so that's why I've gone for that. Although I know I'll probably live to regret that decision once I've started running the cables and hoses through the headset, as I gather that can be quite a headache, but we'll see when I get to it. Now, the fork has a 100mm spacing and can take up to a 47mm tyre, which should be plenty enough room for the Panaracer tyres I will be putting on this. The frame also takes a T47 screw fit bottom bracket, which I'm very happy about, as I definitely wanted to avoid a press fit BB, because all I ever hear in the cycle forums I'm in is how much hassle they are and how prone they are to squeaking. So yes, to have a screw-in BB, very, very happy. It also has a braze-on front derailleur mount and has a number of screws across the frame and fork for bottle cages and frame bags, etc., which is nice if you're going to use this for a bike packing setup. I also really like the fact that it has a round seat post. Now I know these aren't the most aesthetically pleasing things in these days of slimline aero offerings, but it does mean that if you have any issues with the seat post, you can easily swap it out for another one, and you can use a suspension seat post like this one, which I currently have also on my broken gravel bike. On that point, I probably will end up using this suspension seat post just to cushion the ride a little bit. And I'm using it for now just because I don't want to damage the carbon fibre one that comes with the bike. So that's all about there is to tell you about the frame, other than the fact that it is obviously through axle, not QR skewers. Thank God. It was the QR skewers that failed on my old gravel bike, and I desperately don't want to be flying over the handlebars again anytime soon because the QR skewers came loose. Yeah, that wasn't fun. Finally, in terms of weight, the frame itself weighs in at 1,310 grams, the fork is 464 grams, the handlebar comes in at 352 grams, and the seat post at 181 grams, so a total of 2.3 kilograms. Now though, to the important matter of the cost. The frame itself cost $459, but shipping was an extra $150, giving a total price, and I'll do the maths for you, of $699. And yes, you do have to pay in dollars, but I paid through PayPal, so it was fairly straightforward to convert it and send it over to them. However, that dollar amount translates to £444 for the frame and £122 for shipping. So in total, I paid £566 for this thing delivered. And that is an incredible price for a carbon fibre frame. I'm sure you will agree. Now, one thing to mention that I was a little bit concerned about is the sizing. I'm 6'1" and my road bike frame is a 58 centimetre. However, the largest frame Seraph make, in this model at least, is listed as 53 centimetres. Now, obviously, I asked about this when I was emailing back and forth and told them I was 185 centimetres tall, or 6'1", and they assured me that the 49 centimetre frame would be the right size and fit for me. So it was an anxious 4-week wait for this thing to arrive, and it took a little extra time to deliver, as this is a non-standard paint job. I could have had it just matte black or a few other standard colours and it would come within about 2 weeks. But I'm happy to report that now it has arrived. This frame is exactly the same size as my road bike when I measured kind of bottom bracket to the top of the seat tube and the top tube. So all exactly the same. Now, most manufacturers, including big name brands these days, are using their own sizing conventions, meaning it's difficult to get a standard sizing guide across the board. So if you are thinking of getting one of these frames, or any frame to be honest, then I would highly recommend contacting the manufacturer first, giving them your size details, and then letting them tell you what size of their frame they think would fit you best. At the very least, you then have some ammo to shoot back at them if the fit turns out to be completely wrong. Okay, so on to one of the other important parts of this bike build, the group set. Now, since I fitted the Wheeltop EDS TX electronic group set to my road bike, I do have the mechanical 105 group that I swapped out just laying around, doing absolutely nothing at the moment. And I could have just put that on this bike. However, as this is going to be a gravel bike build, I was keen to fit the tailor-made kit for the job. So yes, this will be getting a full Shimano GRX setup. Now, GRX comes in a number of different configurations and varieties, with both 1 and 2 by at the front and 10, 11 and even 12 speed at the back. But I have opted for a 2 by 11 hydraulic setup because, well, those are the parts I have found myself with. And what I mean by that is that I didn't buy this entire group set all in one go. Instead, buying it a right shifter here, a left shifter there, a caliper here, a front and rear derailleur there, when they would come up largely from the John Pye auction site, which I've spoken about many times before. Because of this, I've managed to get the crank, the shifters and the front and rear derailleur with both brake calipers for just £247. The crank and the shifters are GRX 600, which in road bike terms is equivalent to Ultegra level components. The front derailleur is GRX 810 and the rear derailleur is GRX 812, both of which are Dura-Race equivalent. Now the good thing about the rear mech being 812 is that it will take up to a 42 tooth cassette, as opposed to just a 32 tooth with the 810 derailleur. All in all then, that is a pretty cheap price for quite a bit of kit. Again, I'm sure you'll agree. And it just shows that if you're willing to wait and look around for a bit, you can get some incredible bargains on components. Next, onto the wheels. And as I had and continue to have such a great experience with my Elite wheels on my road bike, I decided that it's best to go with what you know, and I got a set of their ENT gravel bike wheels. Now these are 32mm wide and have a 35mm depth profile, so they should offer a little in the way of aero benefits without being overly heavy. Not much more to say about those other than they cost me £280 for the pair. I still cannot get over the value that you get from these things. I've done close to 5,000 miles now on my road bike Elite wheels and they have not faltered once. So I have no doubt that these wheels will do me just as well and last just as long and longer. In terms of weight, they do weigh in at 1,651 grams for the pair, with the front wheel weighing 774 grams and the rear a little bit heavier, obviously with the 11-speed hub at the back, and that's 877 grams. So again, a fairly light wheel set for an incredible price. Finally, we have a few consumable parts, such as the 11 to 42 cassette, which is ZTTO branded from AliExpress. I've bought a few ZTTO components over the years and they've always been pretty solid. So I was happy to take a punt on one of their cassettes at £26. Now I say one of their cassettes, but as we all know, these things are all just generically made in a factory in China somewhere, shipped out, and then they are ZTTO branded afterwards. So it will be interesting to see how this thing lasts. But again, I've had a number of their bits before and they have been pretty good. For the tyres, I'll be using these 38mm Panaracer Gravel King SKs from my old gravel bike, as they still have plenty of life in them. These cost me around 60 quid at the time for the pair of them, but I'm not including them in the cost of this build as I'd already bought them for a previous project, and so it didn't seem fair to include them in the cost. Then we have the chain, which is a HG 901 11-speed chain. Now this is a Dura-Race spec chain, which I don't need in the slightest on this bike, but I got it from AliExpress for 12 quid, so why not? The T47BB then cost me £11, also from AliExpress. The 140mm disc rotors, which are Z-Race branded, they came in at £10 for the pair, again from AliExpress. Then finally, the bar tape, which is a complete no-name brand on AliExpress, and that was £5. Finally were the SPD mountain bike pedals, and I actually got those from Treads here in the UK, and they were £28. Now the only reason I brought them from a UK site is because strangely the SPD pedals on AliExpress were roughly the same price. So rather than waiting a few weeks for them to arrive, I got them shipped to me in just a few days. But I will leave links to all of the parts that I am using for this bike down below in the video description if you want to build a similar frame for yourself. So with everything bundled in then, this entire build has cost £1,188, which again, I'm sure you'll agree is an awesome price for a carbon fibre frame with a full internal routing and a full GRX group set. So I am very, very excited to start getting this thing built together, which is exactly what I'm going to do now, because I think I've spoken about it for quite long enough. And I think the first thing I'm going to do is to start running some hoses and cable housings through this bike. Now, it hasn't come with the usual plastic cable routing guides through it, but this bottom bracket is absolutely huge and it's hollow on the inside, so you can actually get your finger in there and you can feel around inside. Plus the cables will be going down through the top of the headset here, so again that has a rather large aperture, and then you can get your hands up on the inside as well. So I'm hoping it shouldn't be too difficult to run some cable outers and some hoses through here. But I'm going to get those done first, leave those sticking out, and at that point I can then start putting other bits and pieces, some more components together, and then yeah, start working on putting the fork up inside. Because actually one thing I've just realised I haven't mentioned is, as this is internally routed, the cables all come down into the head tube here, and then the front brake has this small aperture hole into the steerer tube, which then comes out of the lower part of the fork. So it's going to be a little bit fiddly, I think, but what is a bike build without a bit of an adventure? And it's all a bit of a learning curve. So yeah, let's get some cable housings and hoses run and see where we are after that. Okay, so putting the fork in isn't the greatest idea, first of all, because obviously you've got all the cables that you need to run through, but I did it because right at the very off, because I bought some of these parts second-hand, like one of the calipers, I think it must have been the front caliper and the right-hand shifter, this hose seems a little bit short, so I just wanted to offer the fork up, put the handlebar in place, and then just see if the hose is long enough to reach the shifter, which in this case I think it will. There should be plenty of hose left on that, which is fine. However, that has identified what might be a bit of an issue with these handlebars. Well, not an issue with the handlebars, but it could cause a few fun and games, because the handlebars have these two channels either side where the cable obviously goes in, and then it has this aperture at the back near the steerer where the cables come out again and then straight down into the spacers for the steerer tube. That is going to be an absolute nightmare to get the cables round and up into that aperture. So as I said earlier, I am going to heavily regret buying a fully internally routed cable, but once it's done, it will hopefully look pretty good, and it's all going to look nice and clean up the front here and no cables sticking out anywhere. So I'm looking forward to that bit, but yeah, in the meantime, not looking forward to cabling up this bar. But now I've got the fork in and I know that this cable housing, or the hose, sorry, is long enough, I can drop that back out again and then start running the rest of the cables through. Right, okay, so far so good. That is the rear brake hose that's gone in and out of the top here, and the rear derailleur followed through quite nicely as well, and that came out quite easily. However, one thing I have just realised, and this may be a very basic thing, but having never done fully internally routed cables before, it's something that I've only just realised. Normally, when you cable a bike up and it goes into the side of the frame, or even it runs on the outside of the frame, the cables will run naked for a certain length. Now, ordinarily you would have pots that the cable housing goes into. Even if it goes into the side of the frame, you'd have a little pot on the side here that this would terminate into, or there'd be a metal lug pot on the outside of the frame, again, that you'd terminate the cable housing into. The cable would run naked down to either under the bottom bracket, along the rear chainstay to the rear derailleur, or up and round for the front derailleur. On this internally routed bike, you don't have any of that, you don't have any of those pots, so you do end up running cable housings the entire length inside the frame. So that's not going to be too much of an issue. I do have enough housing here to accommodate that, but that's just something to bear in mind, that you will need some longer full lengths of cable housing to run all the way through the frame. Now, I've got a slightly shorter cable housing here, which I was a bit concerned about, first of all, because this didn't look like it was going to reach the full distance, and it didn't. So this is why I then had to find this other black housing that I had in my garage, but this one is going to be perfect to run down through and up for the front derailleur. So yeah, as I say, all going quite well at the moment. I don't want to jinx it, but I'm having less problems with this, it seems, than I have had with my semi-internally routed road bike. I don't want to speak too soon, but I'm hoping that this might not cause as many problems as that, and it should be, dare I say it, fairly simple. Right, let's keep going. Right, that is the front derailleur cable housing in as well, and I thought that one was going to be the one that was going to cause me issues, but I realised that there is this little finishing pot in the back of the bottom bracket here, and I was worried that the cable would have to run underneath the bottom bracket and around and up, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of room on the underside of the bottom bracket shell to push a cable through. In fact, there's so little room that I really don't think it's actually designed to go through there, because as thin as a gear cable housing is, it still won't push in and around. So I've actually gone over the top of the bottom bracket, and because again this bottom bracket shell is so huge, it's got a massive aperture, I don't think it's going to cause too many problems. It isn't protruding down into the bottom bracket shell area, so I don't think it's going to cause any problems there. And because I managed to take that black pot out of the frame, the cable housing pushed through quite nicely, and I've now been able to push that pot back in, and the cable now is out ready to go. So that, bar doing the fork again, is all the cabling done, as you can see here. So I will put the fork in now. I'm going to have to put all the bearings on and start putting together the finishing kit just to make sure that everything's in place. And then I can start routing the housings and the hoses up through the spacers, which I will show you now, because as I mentioned earlier, they are specific spacers for internal routing. So as you can see, these have a specific aperture, both back and front, for the cables to run through, and there are various sizes of them, so you can have more or less depending on how high you want your handlebars to be. So as I say, I need to put all the bearings on the top and bottom of the headset, get the fork pushed in, and then we can start routing the cables through these apertures, and hopefully that should be the start of the end of the worst part of this job. So yeah, let's get on with that. And then just to show you this as well, actually, this half moon piece of metal actually goes in the top of the headset and allows room for the cables to slide down in front of the steerer. So rather than having a full complete top cap that caps off the top of the steerer completely, this one is cut out and chamfered like that to allow room for the cables. So that's pretty nifty. So now I've got these cables up and through, let's start getting the headset together and see if we can get the handlebars on. Right, well that's the bottom bearing and the fork up in, and I probably should buy one of those Velcro straps to help me with this, but another couple of cable ties will help keep the fork in place and stop it dropping out while I'm working on the top bearing here. Here's a top tip, remember to put your grease in before you put the steerer up through the headset. It'll make it a hell of a lot easier than trying to push the steerer out of the way and all of these cables while you're doing it. Okay, so that's the top bearing in, and now it's time for this half moon shaped top cap. Okay, slight change of plan, because just as I was looking through the little envelope of finishing kit bits that you get here, I found this other little pot that appears to be a better fit for the plastic spring-loaded part for the front derailleur. So it looks like the cable with a pot on the end of it will terminate into there and then allow just a single cable to come through, which is going to look better and I think will be more ideal. So I'm going to remove the sprung little plastic pot that's in there at the moment, replace it with this, and then the cable housing will just terminate into the bottom of it there. My only concern with that is that if I tug too hard on this end of the cable, it might end up pulling out of that little pot. Fingers crossed that won't happen, but yeah, I definitely think this is more suitable than the little spring-loaded plastic thing that was in there before. So let's get this put in. So yeah, if you ignore all of my greasy fingerprints on the back of the frame there, I think that makes a much nicer termination for the cable. So there's a top tip. Always look through the finishing kit bits that you get before starting to build the bike. And I thought I had, but yeah, that was one bit I missed. So now I've got that in, I can carry on up the front with putting the spacers on and then getting the handlebar put in as well. And while I'm here, I will actually say that at the moment, I'm going to use all of the spacers that are here because I don't know how high or low I want the handlebars to be, so I don't want to take any chances by not using any of the spacers, cutting the steerer off and then finding that it's just a little bit too low. Because it's a gravel bike, I'm fairly happy with it having a more relaxed geometry. I don't necessarily want to be right down in that full tuck, super tuck position on this, because I'm not going to be flying around anywhere too fast on it. It's mainly to be taken over gravel trails and a little bit of off-road trails. So, as I say, leaving the steerer as it is for now, and I'm going to use all of the spacers that they send just to keep that handlebar a little bit higher. And just going back to buying the specific handlebar from Serif for this bike, it just shows, to me at least, that it was worth it, because these spacers have some little knobbly parts on the top that fit perfectly into the underside of the bar here to show you exactly which way round they go and to make sure that it is fitted tight and secure. So again, entirely up to you if you want to buy a separate fully internally routed handlebar, but you're probably not going to end up with these little bits that Serif put in just to make sure that it all fits together properly. Right, well those are the spacers on. That looks pretty good, and I've made sure that the correct hoses and cable housings are on the right side. So on the left here we have the front derailleur cable housing and the rear brake hose, and then on the right here we have the front brake hose and the rear derailleur housing. So now I think it's going to be the hardest part of the job, which is threading the hoses and the cable housings through the handlebar. I'm not entirely sure how this is going to go, and I'm really not looking forward to this, but it's a job that needs doing, so let's do it now. Okay, so one thing I've just discovered now, having put the handlebar on loosely, I've not started running the cables through yet, is that the steerer, even with all of the spacers provided, is still a little bit higher than the handlebar. So I've got two choices here. Either I do cut the steerer down now to 5mm below the handlebar, or I put a spacer in at the top. Now that does mean I'll end up with a chimney sticking out over the top of the handlebars, which I generally don't like. But again, I'm really reluctant at this point to start cutting the steerer around. So I think I will put a spacer on top of the steerer for now. If I find that the handlebar is still too low with all of these spacers in, I'll get in contact with Serif and try to buy a few more of these internally routed cable specific spacers to then build the handlebar up on top so I can get rid of that chimney on top. If I find it's just about perfect when I ride it, then I can be safe in the knowledge that I can cut that part of the steerer off the top and then just use the spacers that I currently have, and then that will be fine. So for now, as I say, I'm going to fit all the cables through, leave this part of the steerer on top, and then just use one of the many carbon fibre spacers on top of that, just to take up that slack for now, and then hopefully we should still be able to have a fully working bike. Right, well I've realised I'm going to have a real struggle getting these hoses and cable housings through the bar here, so I'm going to break out my trusty cable mounting routing guide, which is just a series of magnets and wires that you can pull through the bars, and then hopefully I can figure out some way of pulling these through. This is not going to be the easiest job in the world, unfortunately. And I've also realised as well that there is pretty much no margin for error on the length of these cables, and especially for the brake hoses, because there is no slack that I can push down into the frame once it's terminated into the shifter and into the rear caliper. So again, I'm going to have to cross my fingers that I do this perfectly the first time, because if I don't, I'm going to have to rip the whole hose out and run a new one through. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen, but let's see how it goes. Right, let me give you a slight update on where we are. So I had to remove my mounting kit cable and I exchanged it for an old shift cable, because I thought what I could then do is run that down the middle of the shift housing and then use that to sort of guide the cable housing through the inside of the bar. That went through just about. I mean, it's cut up the cable housing quite a bit, kind of pulling it through and around the corner, but then putting the hose through when there's already another cable already in there is pretty much nigh on impossible. And I've played around with it now for a good 10 to 15 minutes and it just does not want to go. So I'm going to admit partial defeat on this, and I've realised that the handlebar does have some chamfered hollowed out bits. So I think what I can do is, if I pull the cables out and I place the handlebar down on top of the steerer, I should be able to run the housings and the hoses inside that chamfered part, curl them into underneath the bar, and then the bar tape will cover most of it up. It will still be 99.9% fully internally routed, but yeah, I think unless you've got some really, really malleable cable housings and hoses, you're going to struggle to get them through this handlebar. So now I'm going to work on just pulling this shift cable housing out, and then I'm going to try and seat the handlebar on. And then, as I say, I'm going to try and route these cable housings and hoses around the underside of the handlebar. Let's see how that works out. Okay, so that is the handlebar on. As I said before, there is that slight chimney on top of the handlebar there, but the cable housings and the hoses are all in the right place. Now what I need to do is just take this zip tie off. Now I've got that top cap on, I don't need to worry about the handlebar falling out, and I just need to feel, yeah, that feels pretty smooth. That feels pretty good, even with those cables banging against the headset there. That feels pretty good. So that is all in place. Now I just need to finesse these cables around underneath the bar and then put the shifters on and start terminating the cable housings and the hoses into the shifters. Now again, as I said earlier, this part of the job I'm not looking forward to because there is literally zero room for error on these. So wish me luck. Right, that looks pretty good actually. I've put the ferrule end on to the gear shift housing and now fitted that into the back of the shifter, and that looks pretty good. That cable's got a nice bend on it. It's not too sharp. It's not hopefully going to impede the shift cable inside the housing too much, and it should look still fairly neat. So yeah, pretty happy with that. Next up is the hose. Let's see if this goes just as well. Right, that is the hose done on the right hand side for the front brake. I have now got mineral oil everywhere, but I can always clean that up with some of the isopropyl alcohol. But happy that I've got one side done. Now just repeat it on the other side. Now, as I've mentioned in previous videos, when it comes to hydraulic brakes, I am not an expert in the slightest in terminating or feeding this barb in or getting the brakes fitted at all. So I am not going to give any instruction, again, as I've said in previous videos, but what I've done before and I will do again is link a video below to the Park Tools YouTube channel where Calvin Jones will be able to give you a much greater level of instruction than I ever will. Right, okay, so that is both hydraulic hoses terminated and the cable housing for the shift cable put into the pot. That was a bit of a pain, I'll be honest with you. It wasn't, I don't think, quite as difficult as running the internal cables through the plastic routing guides in my road bike. It was a pain, but not quite as much of a pain as that. But that is now done, and you can probably see the cables are sticking down a little bit here, but once the bar tape is on, that will keep it all up, and I'll put some electrical tape on here at the moment just to keep those up out of the way. I'm not going to do the bar tape just yet because I still need to bleed the brakes, and what I don't want to do is exactly as I have now, get mineral oil over all of the fresh new bar tape. So I'm going to leave that for now, but what I will do is now start running the cable for the front derailleur and the rear derailleur, and then I can start putting those on, and then I can get the bottom bracket in. So still a few jobs left to go, but I think the hardest job is now out of the way, which I am very, very thankful for. So let's keep moving. Right, well, having pushed that cable through, having this mineral oil on my hands is becoming a bit of an issue. So I'm going to get some isopropyl alcohol, give the whole bike a good wipe down just to get rid of all of that excess mineral oil, and then hopefully things should be a little less slippery. So let's get the alcohol. Right, so that is the front derailleur cable in on the left shifter. Now, the right shifter, this must have been second-hand when I bought it from eBay. I think I got this one from. So it doesn't have a shift cable with it, but that's not a problem. I've got plenty of those, and now all I need to do is push this through and then run that through into the cable at the back of the bike. Right, so front and rear derailleur cables done. I'm going to put the bottom bracket in now and then put the crank on, because that will tell me how high or low I need to place the front derailleur. So let's get that done. Now, as ever with the bottom bracket, always make sure to put lots of grease on there to stop any water or any dirt or anything like that getting into it. And as is the case with most bottom brackets, both sides will screw in towards the back of the bike. Now, that's not always the case. There are some older Italian bottom brackets, and actually some newer Italian bottom brackets as well, that they will both screw in the normal fashion, so righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. But with most modern British and most European bottom brackets, they all will screw in towards the back of the bike. So on the right-hand side here, on the drive side, it will actually feel like you're undoing the bottom bracket as you're screwing it in, because it has a left-hand thread. But always remember, bottom brackets generally turn in to the back of the bike. The other thing to remember is that all bottom bracket cups should screw in nice and smoothly. So if you find that as you're starting to screw it in, it just feels a little bit graunchy or a little bit gritty, don't keep pushing, because either there can be some metal filings in the threads which are going to damage the threads on either the bottom bracket shell or your cups, or it might be cross-threaded, and that would be an absolute nightmare if you were to continue to push that in, to force that in, because that would completely cross-thread, again, either the threads on your bottom bracket shell or on the cup itself, and then you're going to have a real job to try and chase those back out again, if you even can. So as I say, if the bottom bracket cups are anything more than finger tight as you're screwing them in, don't force it, take it out, have a look inside the bottom bracket shell and just make sure there's no detritus or anything else in there that's stopping it going in smoothly. Okay, bottom bracket in. Now it's time for the crank to be pushed through, and then we can work out where to put the front derailleur. Okay, so that is the front derailleur on, and as ever, using that little red sticker on there just to guide where the front derailleur should go, its position up or down, just to show you how close it should be to those teeth. And that looks just about perfect, so yeah, pretty happy with that. Right, so I'm not going to cable the front derailleur in yet. I'm going to put the rear derailleur on and then get to terminating the cables after that. Right, front and rear derailleur all cabled up nicely, and that seems to be working perfectly at the moment. I'm sure I will have to do a little bit of indexing once I get the wheels on with the cassette and get the chain on as well, but that's a job for later. So for now, I think it's time to start on the wheels, and the first thing I'm going to do is put those disc rotors on. Now, as ever, when putting disc rotors on, try your best not to touch the actual braking surface with your fingers or with anything else for that matter, because if you get any amount of oil on these, then you are going to have a set of screaming brakes and no one's going to be happy with you. Okay, so that is the disc rotors on, and the next job is to run the rim tape around the inside of the rim here, and then I'll get the inner tubes and tyres on. I'm not going to put the wheels on once I've done that. I'll leave them to one side because the brakes still need bleeding, so I'm going to have to take the wheels off to do that anyway, because I don't want any mineral oil getting all over the pads or the disc rotors. So I'll get the wheels done next, and then I will move on to bleeding the brakes, which is not a job I enjoy, but once again, it's a job that needs doing, so let's get on with it. Right, well that is both tyres and inner tubes in, and I have to say these Gravel King SKs went on to these rims very, very easily. I remember when I was trying to put these on to the wheels, the giant SX2 wheels I think they are, that I put on my son's gravel bike, and they were a little bit sticky. They took a while to go on, but on these ones they went straight on, which is very nice. Now, to pump them up, I could, because I'm at home, use my track pump. However, because I'm lazy and because I also want to again show off the absolute brilliance of this little Psych Plus AS2 Pro pump, I'm going to use this to pump them up to 50 psi. Right, both tyres done and on, but as I say, I'm not going to put them in yet because now comes the bleeding. And as I've mentioned in many videos before, I am not one to give instruction on bleeding brakes because I'm really no expert at it. So once again, I'm going to leave a link below to the Park Tools YouTube channel where Calvin Jones once again will tell you exactly how you need to do it. But for now, I'm going to get these hoods pulled back and get bleeding. Right, well that is the front brake done, and that is working very nicely. That's nice and sharp, and yeah, all the oil cleaned up around there, and that is going to stop me nicely. Now onto the back one. Right, well that is the front and rear brakes bled, and they are now working perfectly. I did put the rear wheel on to centre the disc rotor with the caliper, got that done, and then realised that I hadn't put the cassette on, so I had to drop the wheel back out again, put the cassette on with the spacer behind the cassette because it is a 10, 11, 12 speed hub, so you will need a spacer behind an 11 speed cassette just to stop it rattling around. But that is all now done. As I said earlier, I've got the derailleurs wired in now. I still need to sort out the indexing on those, but that's fine, and I still need to do the bar tape. Other than that, and putting the chain on, we have got, I think, pretty much a completed bike, but it's very late in the evening now. This has taken quite a while today because, as I've said before, putting a bike together is fairly simple, but when you're trying to record it as well, it makes it a little more time consuming. So I'm going to call it a night here, and I will come back in the morning to pick this up, and hopefully it should be a fairly quick job tomorrow. So by the miracle of modern technology, I will see you tomorrow morning in a couple of seconds. Okay, and just like that, we are back with another day. And yes, I'm absolutely going to regret wearing a white t-shirt to do bike mechanics, but that is the choice I've made, so I'm going to have to live with it. So yes, as I said about 10 seconds ago, I still have the chain to put on, the bar tape to do, and then the new seat post and my old charge spoon saddle. But the first job I'm going to do is get the chain put on and sized for this massive 42 tooth cassette at the back. However, there is only a 46 tooth chainring at the front, so it might end up being roughly the same size as my road bike chain, but let's see. Now, as ever, I'm going to take as much of the manufacturing oil or grease or whatever you want to call it off of the chain, just because you don't need it. It's there just to keep the chain from going rusty while it's sat on the shop shelf for God knows how long. But if you leave it on there, all it's going to do is pick up dry dirt and dust from the road, and you're going to end up with a grinding paste on your chain pretty quickly. I'm probably going to end up waxing this chain anyway, so I will have to do a full degrease on it eventually. But for now, I'm just going to put it on with the manufacturing oil in the rollers, but I don't want any of it on the outer plates. Okay, so to size the chain, I'm going to use the standard method of big ring to big ring while bypassing the rear derailleur. Now, I've done this before in previous videos and I've explained it, and it never goes too well. I'm never able to explain it that well. So, once again in this video, for the third time, I'm going to link a video down below to the Park Tool channel where Calvin Jones will give a much better set of instructions than me. Right, well, with the chain cut and a little bit of fettling of the indexing, the high-low screws, that is all now shifting perfectly and running very nicely. So, other than putting the seat post and the saddle in, the last big job to do is the one that I absolutely hate, the bar tape. So let's give this one last clean up with some isopropyl alcohol, drop the bike down a little bit and get on with it. Now, I've mentioned this in far too many videos that I've done previously, but if this is the first one of my videos you're ever watching, you might think that this is a little bit strange with me wrapping insulation tape around the bars. However, I'm not just wrapping electrical insulation tape around the bars, I'm wrapping it inside out, so the sticky side is on the outside. That helps so that when you put the bar tape on, rather than that stupidly tiny little strip of sticky stuff on the back of the tape, you have the whole of this to hold it on. The benefit of that is if the bike ever falls over, if you have a crash and part of the tape is cut, that means the whole of the bar won't become unravelled. Well, that's one side done, and I have to say I'm never happy with the end finishing bits of tape that they send with these cheap bar tape packs. They just never seem to look right, so I think I'm going to have to find my black insulation tape somewhere just to finish that off nicely, but that is a job for later because now I have to do the left-hand side. Okay, it won't take the most eagle-eyed amongst you to realise that I now have a different t-shirt on and the bike is pretty much complete. Well, not pretty much complete, it is complete with saddle, pedals and everything else now done. And there's good reason for that, because annoyingly, once I had completed this build and completed the video, I took it inside to edit all together and this part of the video had no sound. I have no idea how that happened. I can only imagine that because I was in here recording for so long, my microphone died. So I'm going to have to go through that last bit very quickly with you. Thankfully, I didn't say too much of note, which sounds about right for my normal talking, but what I did go through is the bung piece that goes in the top of the steerer tube here. Now, the original one that I had was only about 1.5 inches long, and because I have this chimney on top of the steerer, it's important that you have a bung that's long enough to reach below the bottom of the stem clamp of the handlebar. The reason for that is that bung expander effectively stops the handlebar crushing the carbon steerer inwards. So if there was nothing in there and you start screwing up these pinch bolts either side of the stem, you have a real risk of crushing that carbon steerer. So you put the bung inside, you tighten it up and it expands, and that then gives the strength for the stem of the handlebar to close nice and tightly onto that without the risk of crushing the steerer. Now, as I say, the original one I got was only about 1.5 inches, so it only would have come to just below the top of the stem. Now the one that I've put in there is about 2.5, 3 inches, so it is a lot longer and it will sit down here and probably end about the middle section of the spacers here. So that is good, and hopefully I shouldn't have any issues with the steerer snapping as I'm riding it. Other than that, I have now put the carbon seat post in and my trusty charge spoon saddle, and the SPD pedals have gone on. And I think that is pretty much it. I haven't yet taken this outside to have a proper ride on it because I'd left it in the stand to go in and edit the video. So this has been up here the whole time. The only thing left to do though, as ever in all of these build videos, is weigh it. So I have my trusty luggage scales here. So let's get it off the stand and see how much it weighs. Okay, that comes in at 9.35 kilos, which I don't think is a bad weight for a gravel bike, considering also that the tyres alone weigh about 800 to 900 grams. And I will actually be changing those tyres for the Gravel King slicks that I have currently on my son's gravel bike. I'm going to steal those for the weekend because, as I found out before, these big knobbly tyres have quite a bit of rolling resistance on the road. So yeah, I'm going to put a pair of slicks on for the Garmin ride out this weekend and then maybe put these back on when I do some proper off-roading. But what do you think of all that? What do you think of the weight, the price? £1,188 for what I think is an absolutely stunning looking gravel bike. Is this the sort of thing that you would do? Would you buy one of these cheap Chinese carbon fibre frames? I have to say I've been really impressed with the Seraph frame and with the communication I've had backwards and forwards with Seraph. They seem like a very, very reputable company. Obviously, I've had no reason to contact them with a problem, and sometimes that is where you can find issues with companies. But as I say, the conversations I've had back and forth so far have been very, very good. So I'm very hopeful that, should I come up with any issues with this, hopefully I won't, but if I do, they should be pretty good as well. And not forgetting these Elite wheels as well. I think these look absolutely stunning. I really love the 50mm depth profile ones on my road bike, but I actually really like these 35mm ones as well. I just think it gives a nice mix of aerodynamics with weight saving, and I cannot wait to get out on this thing and ride it. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Would you have a bike like this? Would you build a bike like this? Would you spend nearly £1,200 on a bike like this? Throw a comment down below and I'll get back to as many of you as I can. But otherwise, as ever, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video useful and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.